Was the Glasgow Circuit World Championships worthy?
Yes.
Did the Belgian squad approach this race strategically perfect?
No.
Is Tadej Pogacar the best cyclist in the world?
Yes.
Will Mathieu Van Der Poel his palmarès be remembered for a long time?
Yes.
I've got the spores, the sickness. There's the twins in my brain.
You all know I love the cyclist Mathieu Van Der Poel. My love for the man is indescribable. Yesterday was something magical. Through the fields toward Glasgow, the circuit with corners and hills waiting. A race profile alone doesn't create an entertaining race, the riders do. From protesters gluing themselves on the road to Mathieu Van Der Poel gluing the rainbow jersey on his shoulders. What a day it was, a day to remember. My name is Yves. I'm here once again joined by Bram. Hi Bram, how are you?
Hey, doing well. Just came back from vacation, so I'm very well rested.
Did you enjoy the vacation?
Yeah, I did. It was a little bit of a change of schedule because I was planned to be in Glasgow for the Worlds. That ended up not happening at the very last moment, but made the most of it. Went to France and spent Sunday watching the Worlds as any bike-loving enthusiast.
Yesterday was something magical for me. Can you take us through your day yesterday?
Yeah, sure. So I woke up quite late because of course I was on vacation, and I knew that the race was going to start at 10:30, but I also knew that Yves, you were going to be on the Domestique live, so I was like, no need to worry, I can just catch up on whatever I've missed. And then at around 11, so that was after about 20 kilometers of racing, tuned in. The break had formed, and then about an hour later, there was a little bit of a break in the race. But after that, I was basically sat still in the couch, just watching the race, following it along on Twitter and making clips during the same time. So I enjoyed myself.
Well, let's do this episode in a chronological way. The start with the break forming. It took actually quite a bit longer than it usually does. Normally, you have the weaker countries just going for the break and getting 4, 5, 6 minutes instantly. But right now, there were a lot of teams interested, sometimes even some bigger teams. So it took quite a bit effort because everybody knew the circuit in Glasgow was hard. So yeah, it would be hard to survive in the peloton. But eventually you got a break from around 9 men, if I recall correctly. The strongest name, in my opinion, was Chris Nylands, together with Denham, Vermaarke, and Townsend, and a couple more. When I saw that break, I said, a couple of them might go long into the race. What did you think back then?
Yeah, I think I saw 3 or 4 names that was like, these are actually like potential like final riders, or they would at least get to the circuit and like be able to do a couple laps, and in the end some of them did, but not the riders I was expecting, to be honest. But when I saw Nederlands in there, you know, his Tour de France was super impressive. He clearly still had that form. So yeah, I expected quite a bit of from him, and Vermaarke as well. Super impressive rider, and he also seemed very eager.
And eventually it was Denham who surprised the cycling world, surprised me by surviving the longest and getting into the top 10 at the final results. That's very impressive.
To be honest, I didn't expect it at all. When I think the break was caught by already a group of favorites at that point, because the race was so hectic and chaotic. How far along were we in the race? I think there was like 50 kilometers left to go.
Yeah, still a couple of laps to go. It was Vermaarke was the last to be taken back, I think. But
Yeah.
there was a little attack by Pogacar, if I recall correctly, and the fourth or fifth wheel was Dinham, who was able to react on an attack from the main favorites for the race.
Yeah, that's
But
crazy.
it's crazy, and surely knowing the effort he had to put into that break to get away and to stay away before they reached the circuit in Glasgow, that's impressive. I saw an article from him as well. He has a history on the mountain bike, and he said, I love it when there are a lot of corners and it's technical like this because he's quite explosive and he can accelerate quickly after the corners and take the corners a little bit faster. So
Yeah.
he has an advantage there as well.
Yeah, I think that's an advantage that the eventual winner Van Der Poel, of course, had as well. Plus also the winner from the men's junior.
Yeah.
I think Philipsen. So he's also a mountain biker. And he was even riding with mountain bike gloves, which I loved. But definitely, like, having that technique was super important for this year's course. And some guys have it, some guys don't. And clearly, Dinham was able to use it and ride a very efficient race that way.
If we move on to further on in the race, the most noteworthy thing happened. The peloton had to stop their effort for a little bit less than 1 hour. Explain what happened.
So a group of protesters glued themselves to the road surface. I don't think their logos or slogans were ever on camera, but I've forgotten the name of the organization. It was a climate change group that was protesting mainly Ineos, it seems.
Yeah.
So by mentioning them in this podcast, I think we've done what they wanted. But yeah, I think there were 4 guys or 4 people glued to the road surface, and that took a long time because also they picked a really strong spot to do it because it was in the middle of nowhere. It took police 25 minutes to arrive, and then they needed to start getting them off the road surface and fixing the road surface because, of course, the substance they used also damaged the road and could potentially cause damage to the bikes.
Well, how can you explain this? It's protesting is a right, but doing it like this, yeah, it harms them more because there were no slogans seen. The coverage didn't show them. It was just 45 minutes of seeing riders getting cold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been quite vocal about it on Twitter. I've mellowed on it a little bit since, because I do think that they achieved their goals of having even podcasts like this talk about what their organization is, what they were protesting. I think every news organization used their tweets to say this is what's happening. So in the end, they got what they wanted. Do I think their cause is right? I definitely agree with your environmental cause, but is this the smartest way of going about it? No, I don't think so. But, people do what they deem necessary themselves. We don't all have to agree on it.
True, but I just think it was sad because all those riders in the peloton, they don't wear a lot of clothes, so they were all getting pretty cold. We saw Nylands in the front group getting hugged by a team staff member to get a little bit of temperature in his body. Because if you're sweating like that and have to wait 45 till 50 minutes, it influences the legs. And maybe did it influence the race result at the end?
I don't think it influenced the winner, but I definitely think it influenced the progression of the race, mainly because of how the peloton and the break started right after the restart. the peloton especially set off at a furious pace. Basically, some guys can do amazing stuff on cold legs. Others, they need the warm up. And if you're one of those guys that needed the warm up, well, your race was kind of done, because from the moment you hit the local circuit, you saw a lot of outsiders, dark horses, kind of already float towards the back, even not having mechanicals. But you're like, okay, he blew up his legs by the looks of it, and I'm guessing that has something to do with that very hard restart.
And it's including that also the extra 45 till 50 minutes, the nutrition plans that teams make to have enough energy left for the final of the race. It changes quite a bit as well, because it's 50 minutes extra. You're just standing there, but your body uses energy to keep warm to be there. So things will have to be changed a little bit because of that as well, I assume.
Yeah, I think you also have to account for some extra fueling to get back up to race temperature. So yeah, fueling will definitely be different. Of course, you do have access to the race to the cars behind. You can get what you need. But of course, if you're in a peloton of about 170 riders, that takes a while. I did hear a story about Van Der Poel finding a house. I didn't see any house in the coverage, but apparently he did find a house to have a little bit of a nature break, do a Tom Dumoulin. Well, luckily for him, there was the option to do that, and there was a house. But yeah, of course it influenced the race. I don't think it changed the winner. I don't think it changed the podium. But below that, could have an impact.
What if Van Der Poel didn't find that house and he couldn't take his?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I want to really go too far into that scenario, but yeah, it's good that he doesn't have the white pants yet.
Well, it's a funny story, but that way Van Der Poel was at the back of the peloton, and you just mentioned the peloton started the restart in a furious way. So Van Der Poel was gapped for an instant because there was a car on the road as well, and they had to avoid that one. That's the first time the Dutch team had to put an effort in to bring Van Der Poel back, because the team decided to not work at the front of the peloton at that moment. It was just the Belgian squad and Slovenia who was working. So there we saw the Dutch team for the first time in action.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of saw the same thing happen with Van Der Poel in the Ronde van Vlaanderen, where there was that sudden echelons. He does seem to get caught out by these moves quite a bit, but in the end, it doesn't really seem to affect him. It is brought up in commentary quite often, like, why is he all the way at the back here? Like, it's wasting energy because you have to get to the front. You have to do more accelerations. But, well, he doesn't seem to be affected. But strategy-wise, definitely questionable.
Yeah, but I have to say, we saw Van Der Poel at the back in a lot of races, but except at the first 2 hours of the race yesterday, he was very much the whole race at the front. He was always in the first 20 riders when they reached the Glasgow circuit. So he knew that circuit was important and he had to be at the front there. So he learned the lesson, I think, surely after that incident earlier in the day.
Yeah, for sure. Not all riders learn from that, but he does know that circuit is just super vital, and in the end, it turned out to be.
So the race was restarted quite close to the first climb of the day, Crow Road. So a lot of legs were still a little bit cold when they entered that first climb, and the pace was furious on there once again. I didn't think it was that hard looking at the coverage, but we saw the Domestique data thread Dieter made yesterday. with the power file from Jasper Stuyven. The power they had to put in there was already quite high.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone was dropped from the major teams or the major nations. So yeah, I think it's just like it went into the legs as a very painful experience. Because let me just look at the figure that Dieter came up with: 6.8 watts per kilogram for 7 minutes 43 seconds on cold legs. Oh, that's gonna hurt so much.
It hurts. Yeah. And then it's time for the Glasgow circuit. A lot of talks about it before the start. It's too dangerous, too much corners. It's Wout van Aert doesn't like it. It's everyone had his say about the course. What we saw was a phenomenal Denmark team in the opening lap. The way Morkov guided Skjelmose and Pedersen through those corners was exceptional, and the team rode an exceptional race from start to finish.
Yeah, for sure. Morkov showed why he was there. Like, just positioning wise, he was exactly where he needed to be. And even on lap 1 with Mats Pedersen in his wheel, which I would say, okay, that's going to cost you a lot of energy, being Mats Pedersen, who's going to need to ride the final. But positioning was apparently so important that you needed to be right there at the front. And you could spend that little bit of extra energy being in the wind instead of having to re-accelerate out of all of those corners. Personally, I love the circuit. Is it the most beautiful one? No. But it created such a type of racing that I thought was really attractive. Does every world championship need to be exactly like this? Of course not. But, you know, we've had the type of circuits that are, well, like the recent Italian one on the race circuit.
Monza.
With it. Was it Monza?
Monza, I think. Of Imola.
Imola. It was Imola. Like,
yeah.
I thought that was like the standard world championship. You have like 1 or 2 climbs. It's kind of similar to a Wollongong. And it's just, okay, if that's the recipe for a world championship, it gets a bit dull after a while. And this was a nice change up. And, you know, in a couple of years, we're going to Abu Dhabi, apparently. We'll have a very different circuit there. But
you never know, they will finish on, what is it, Jabal El Hafid or something?
Jabal Hafid,
at Yates, or the Simon Yates climb. You never know, they do that. But
I think it's 35 at that point. But he'll not retire.
He can go for it. Though.
He'll not retire just so he can win world championship on Jabal Hafid.
It's actually quite scary that we're saying Denmark was that phenomenal, because one of their leaders, Asgreen, underperformed, and Mikkel Bjerg was taken out of the race due to a mechanical on a very bad moment. So imagine them being in shape or no mechanicals, it would be even stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I think 3 Danes really impressed me. That being Morkov, Skjelmose, and Pedersen. Morkov, just because you don't expect him to be there. Like, he's a lead out guy, but he's doing the work of like a perfect Domestique at that point. And then you have Skjelmose, who, well,
he was phenomenal.
Yeah. If he doesn't do that thing with his tires to let air out when it got a little bit slippier, I think where did he end up in the results? Like, maybe just top 10 or not?
He isn't in the top 10, but he was in the main group, and he was one of the most active riders in that group.
Yeah, I was very impressed with him.
Yeah, it was phenomenal to see. I expected Asgreen to be co-leaded together with Pedersen, as a lot of people did, but I never expected Skjelmose to be that strong. I know he was good, but he had the Tour de France in his legs as well. Domestique a lot to get Ciccone that KOM jersey. The way he rode in Glasgow, I never expected that, to be honest. I know a lot of people did. I never saw his name pop up in stars, or maybe Epo gave him 1 star or 2 stars, if I recall correctly. But he wasn't seen as one of the main favorites, and without that tire issue, he surely would have been top 10.
Yeah, I think that is like a choice he made to let air out of his tires, which I don't think I've ever seen on a road race before, and generally not something you should be doing. Of course, I'm just an amateur.
Yeah, I saw a comment on our preview of the World Championship saying Pedersen was struggling with his tires as well. Once it started raining, he wasn't confident in them anymore. It was quite slippery. So Pedersen was complaining about it. Schelmose let some air out to have a little bit more grip. They both ride in the little track team with Pirelli tires. I don't know if other guys in that front group used Pirelli tires, but
do they use Pirelli or Bontrager?
If I recall correctly, if Dieter said they use Pirelli, I'm not sure. I trust Dieter.
Okay, that's surprising to me, because Bontrager is like a really closely tied brand to Trek. But sure.
Yeah, there has to be. Is it a coincidence, or they both ride for little Trek? It are the only two guys who complain about the tires.
I mean, clearly other guys were suffering with the road surface as well. But making the decision to stop and let air out of your tires, which is going to cost you at least 30 seconds. I think it's a wild decision, and it took him out of the race. I think he had more to give, to be honest. But
I just
still
researched it, and the team is riding with Pirelli tires.
All right. Well, shame
so
on that.
Then it started to rain. A hard circuit became even harder. A tricky circuit became even trickier. We saw some crashes. Crash from Narvaez, who rode an exceptionally strong race till then. A crash from Van Dijk when it was still dry. Trentin crashed as well. Besides that, not a lot of crashes happened.
No, to be honest, like the circuit was dangerous, yes. But I think it's as dangerous as you want to make it. The riders are the ones taking the risks, and they knew how slippery it was, and most of them managed that risk pretty well. I think the one crash that kind of really surprised me was the one from Trentin, as they were going up Montrose Street, where he just kind of got. Did he hit the barriers or something?
I
basically,
think he clipped the barriers a little bit. If I recall correctly, there was an attack at the front, and the pace went up a little bit. And with that pace a little bit higher, he went a little bit wider into the corner and clipped the barrier.
So that's not the fault of the course. That's just
it's his own fault.
Or just like it's a race incident anyway.
But yeah, I love the track. I love the course. I already said it, and we only saw riders crashing on their own. I never saw, or I barely saw, more than 5 riders crash at once. So it was Van Dijk crashed alone, Trentin crashed alone, Narvaez crashed alone. And then the most important crash, Van Der Poel. Yeah, let's start talking about Mathieu Van Der Poel.
Actually, before we get there, I think a Bettiol really needs to be mentioned as well here,
and he was mentioned in the preview.
Good
as well.
Good job, guys. Good job.
Yes, thank you.
He also had some stars in the preview as well. I was amazed by his level, and of course his technique in the wet roads. Like every corner, he took seconds on a group that has Wout van Aert and Mathieu Van Der Poel in it. So these guys are used to riding on kind of slippery surfaces. So to see them like lose time on a Bettiol, it's amazing. would I have liked to see Bettiol become world champion? I don't think so. But that's just because, world champions, you want them to be with a huge palmares. And of course, Bettiol has won the Ronde van Vlaanderen, so he has some palmares, but he's only won 4 races in his whole career.
We have to be honest. If someone wears the rainbow jersey, you want to see him that jersey through the season. And if it's a Bettiol, we might not see it as much as it is in Van Der Poel or a Van Aert or a Pogacar. We have to be honest there. He is a very strong rider, but he's just isn't there the whole season. He just played all or nothing. He mentioned in an interview as well. He saw it started raining and he said, I'm going to go for it. It's not like I'm going to go a lot slower or faster when I'm in the group, because they would poker a little bit behind and there were more race dynamics in a group than when you're alone. And he kept his gap for quite a while. But the chasing group, the legendary chasing group with Van Aert, Pogacar, Van Der Poel, I'm forgetting one.
Pedersen. They just played it very smart and they reeled them in at a slow pace, a slow burner, just taking turns of each other, not killing each other, just slowly reeling them back in. That was very smart from that group. Yeah, I think with the road surface being so slippery, doing those like hard accelerations, I don't know if that was also going to be working out for them or if that would actually put them in the risk of crashing. But yeah, it was a really smart thing to do. Like Bettiol was also super consistent, but you noticed from the moment he got caught, there was also right the moment where Van Der Poel attacked. He was done, and he basically just rode to the finish. For some reason or another, there was a race camera on him until the finish, where he actually finished 10th place, and we didn't see Kung come back. But he rode a phenomenal race. A little bit unexpected for me, but you guys mentioned him, so we're all good.
And then the Flying Dutchman, Mathieu Van Der Poel, decides to attack not on Monroe Street. He always does something different.
I think he just saw that everyone else was kind of dead and said, well, okay, let's go. And yeah, that was the end of it. Wout van Aert tried to follow, and I think he was in his wheel for 10 seconds, and then it was done. It was an amazing attack.
That attack was magnificent, brutal. This is why we watch cycling. This is why we love cycling. If it would be Van Aert, I know I'm a big Van Der Poel fan, don't understand me wrong. It's not because Wout van Aert is in that group and can't follow. It would be as nice if Wout did it. We all saw what happened before that, how hard the race was, and the way Van Der Poel is able to completely explode and rip the race apart. It was a magic effort, in my opinion.
I think he was still just the freshest of them all, really. He was able to put out that explosive power where I think for the rest of the riders it was a little bit dulled down already. But if you can put in such an attack on Pogacar, Wout van Aert, and Mats Pedersen, those are not slouches. All of them are known for having a sprint in somehow different fields. You don't consider Pogacar a sprinter, but he is known for his explosive power, which he would go to prove later on. But yeah, it was an amazing attack, like kind of similar to the one he did in Siena to win Strade Bianche.
I want to see his power file from that attack. I'm sure it aren't data with a phenomenal high amount of watts because of the hardness of the race, how hard the race has been till then. But still, I would do a lot for that power file, and I think Dieter would do even more for that power file.
Yeah.
Then
he said he would do something, but I don't think we should repeat that on the microphone.
Well, then I remember I received a text from my dad saying this race is over. The rainbow jersey is for Van Der Poel. And I texted him, it's not over till he finishes. What happens 2 minutes later? He crashes. Sorry for the word, but at that moment I said, fuck my life. This is not happening.
Your dad is quite the jinxer, apparently.
Yeah, and I'm gonna never forgive him for that. And surely, if Van Der Poel would have lost that, I would have cried so much.
Yeah, understandable. To be honest, when I saw it, I think the gap was about 35 seconds.
Yeah.
That is not, and it was 16 kilometers to go. You know, that gap could have just melted away. And I think if there was race radio, that would have melted away, because the chasers would know he's down, he's got damage to his shoe, he's wounded, we can get him. But they never knew, and so they just started playing tactical games with each other. But yeah, I was saying, like, no, not like this, because I didn't want Wout van Aert to win, or Mats Pedersen. But I was like, no, this can't be the way. Van Der Poel definitely deserved that win, and considering how big of an advantage he had at the line, it was clear that he did.
It was so weird to see he crashes when he had an advantage of 35 seconds. And if I recall correctly, he crashed a little bit before Montrose Street, so quite close to the finish line to start of last lap. And he crossed that finish line with 40 seconds advantage. So he gained time while he crashed. That's so weird. I knew the chasing group wasn't committing anymore. He has lost 10 to 15 seconds in that crash, I think.
Yeah, there was also, I think right after, there was a little attack from Van Aert on Montrose Street. Then they got a little closer. I think they got to like 25 seconds. They might have even seen him just cross the top. But after that, their pace completely died. And I think actually the Van Aert attack killed the chase. Because after that, it was like, oh, we're going to start attacking for podium places now? Fine. Let's just not cooperate anymore and just see what happens. So if they had known that Van Der Poel was down, I think they would have raced very differently. But this is how the worlds are.
How lucky was Van Der Poel that his equipment didn't break?
I mean, it kind of did, didn't it? That boa came off.
Only that shoe and a little bit of... Yeah, only that shoe, his derailleur could go in crash mode, that he couldn't shift gears anymore. His steering could be broken.
Yeah, for sure. Like he crashed on the right side, so that's the side where you would see broken derailleurs. He lucked out on that. But of course, even then, you would say he deserved to be world champion. What can you say about it?
Like we say in Belgium, kampioenengeluk.
Yeah, that's something you could say.
And then, sorry to mention it, but Wout Zilver van Aert did it again.
Yeah, it's starting to get a little bit painful. I think it's quite showing that he didn't want to wait for the sprint and attacked earlier to get a gap. I kind of didn't see that coming. I thought he would be confident in a sprint against the other two. But yeah, if Van Der Poel wasn't here, Wout van Aert would be considered basically the best classics rider of the world. But because Van Der Poel is here, he's not. And it must be so frustrating for him to have that shadow on his career, because just imagine the amount of races that Van Aert would have won if Van Der Poel wasn't there. It's insane. But of course, we should still see that Van Aert is a massively talented rider and a champion in his own right. But it's just the wins count, and that's what people look at the end of a career, not the amount of second places.
Can he do something to take gold instead of silver? I saw things on Twitter saying Van der Poel is born with explosive legs. He just has that explosivity extra that Van Aert doesn't have. Don't understand me wrong. Van Aert is explosive as hell, otherwise he wouldn't have such a palmarès in the cyclocross and etc. But just Van der Poel has that something extra that can be trained, I think. But I'm not sure of it, because Remco Evenepoel trained his explosivity hugely, and he made such a big step forward with it.
I don't think explosiveness is what Van Aert needs to be able to get rid of to beat Van der Poel. Van Aert's weapon in a lot of races is his time trial, right? Or that's something he has that Van der Poel has a lot less. So maybe that's actually the ability that he can use to be able to beat him. Like you would see Cancellara versus Bonen story. Cancellara didn't have sprint. Bonen did. What did Cancellara do? He has a small gap, but then he keeps riding and you won't see him ever again. I think that's perhaps more of a strategy that would fit Van Aert to get better at that. Well, to put even more on that endurance effort, because that's clearly where he has a little bit more of a talent than Van der Poel does.
To end off this World Championship recap, a last surprise, Pogacar beating Pedersen on the line. That was... it's a surprise, and it isn't a surprise. A sprint after more than 270k is always something else. But when we saw Pogacar suffer in the last lap, even to hold on sometimes uphill when Van Aert tried something, and then still be able to beat Pedersen on the line, that's very impressive.
Yeah, I think there was lactate coming out of his toes at that point to be able to pull off that sprint. It's insane. Of course, what you're saying is correct, that a sprint after 270 kilometers on this course especially is not a regular sprint. You can't do that 10 times and get the same result 10 times. It's just apparently Pogacar won. Like, he willed it into existence and he made it work. But clearly he suffered because of it, because in the mixed media zone with the press afterwards, he was just dead.
Yeah, he was close to collapsing and was a little bit dizzy, but he just had to go to the toilet, he said with a smile afterwards. But he mentioned right before he left the mixed zone that this was the hardest race of his life.
Yeah, I mean, I completely believe that.
And the guy has ridden insanely tough races, so this says a lot.
I mean, he's ridden insanely tough races, but usually the races where he goes the deepest are stage races, and the days are a little bit shorter. This is one of those, what was it, a 7-hour day? 6 hours and 7 minutes. That's an insanely long time to be riding at that high power output. Even if you ride a Ronde van Vlaanderen, the first 2 or 3 hours, you're riding at an easy pace in the peloton. In this one, you rode an hour and a half on easy pace, and then basically, I think I heard a term, the excrement hit the oscillation device. It's a nice term for something else. Maybe the viewers can put it in our comments. Anyway, it's a very different race, but extremely hard.
Yeah, just to convince listeners who still don't believe this race was hard and made for sprinters. People said it was made for sprinters. in the file from Jasper Stuyven, he had more than 50 efforts above 1000 watts. More than 50.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
And then you also have to consider that Steven was very often at the front of the race, as opposed to, like if you're at the back, you have to do even more of them because you always have to keep closing those small gaps with sprints. If you're at the front, you can actually kind of minimize them.
During the preview podcast, there were a couple of bold statements made. Bold back then. People didn't really believe things we said. Like Pogacar getting the top favorite status from April. A lot of people called him crazy for that. Finishing third isn't that bad. So we agreed there were doubts about Evenepoel on this circuit. I think we can say that's correct.
Yeah. On a technical course, he still suffers. Like very early in his career, and his career is still very young. There was a lot of talks about his technical skills in descending, and that has gotten a lot better. But I think positioning wise, perhaps he suffered a little bit too much because he spent a lot of time at the back of the peloton. I think in the first 3 laps, he was never at the front. He was having to close gaps. And then when he was in the front group, he did do quite a few attacks. But then when his attack was done, he went back to the back of the group. Yeah. But apparently that was part of the tactics from the start, and that it was all in on Wout. Is that nice to say afterwards, or was that actually the plan? I don't know. From what I could see, from the moment they hit the course, it was clear it was not going to be for him. He was suffering too much because of the corners. But his attacks, they landed, and I think they helped tire out someone like a Pogacar.
You mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, Belgium wasn't strategically perfect. What could they have done differently?
Oh, I have no idea. But if you're strategically perfect, you win.
That's
correct. That was like, okay.
But you can be strategically perfect and just like Van Aert missed that 5 seconds extra to follow Van Der Poel. It doesn't have to do a lot with the strategy of the team. It was just that final effort wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, with the hindsight being 2020, you could say that Van Aert put in a little bit too many efforts earlier on, which could potentially have cost him that effort onto Van der Poel's wheel. But I think that's useless to talk about, because in the end, I think Belgium rode the best tactical race they could, knowing the information they had. So in that sense, I do think they rode a perfect tactical race. But if they had, well, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I understand.
You win the perfect race, not get second.
I know I mentioned in that previous podcast, a team isn't that important. And I written down correct because Pogacar didn't really have a team. Van der Poel didn't have a team neither. Van Baarle was in there, but he was at the back of the whole time and didn't really help Van der Poel in the race.
Mm-hmm.
Belgium and Denmark showed that a team can be important and can make the race harder. But you didn't necessarily need a team to be world champion, in my opinion.
No, that's true. I think sort of by having the 2 very strong teams, they kind of negated each other. They killed each other with the constant attacks from Van Aert, Evenepoel, and I think once from Van Hooijdonk as well.
Yeah, Stuyven went in an attack as well once.
Yeah, and then Skjelmos and Pedersen doing it from the other side. You know, those teams were kind of negating each other. So is it important to win? No, but it did help to make the race very hard. And I think that's what those riders really wanted.
Another thing I mentioned was there will be a load of crashes on the circuit, and that's incorrect.
Yeah.
The circuit wasn't really dangerous, but you had to watch out every corner. There were a lot of corners, but the crashes didn't really happen as I expected. I was quite bold on a question that Hannes asked: is Belgium the strongest team lining up? I said no. I had big balls and said Denmark is the strongest team.
I think you were right. Although you do have to say that, in that final group, not final group, but like when we had a split off from the peloton, there was 5 Belgians and 3 Danes. So you do have to then say, yeah, Belgium probably has the numerical advantage and is the stronger team there. But with Denmark losing and Asgren and Bjerg, it's different. I do think that Denmark had an amazing team.
Yeah, the work Kragh Andersen did as well in lap 3 or 4 was also, they kept the pace going the whole time. When Italy decided to withdraw pulling, they just went to the front and made the race hard again. They created this hard race, or they were a major factor in this terribly tough race.
Yeah, definitely.
Then a last statement: sprinters has no chance. We were anonymous agreeing on that one. Philipsen, Kooij, nothing for them. On Twitter, people were calling us crazy, but we are 100% correct on that one. And I'm saying it again, 100% correct on that one. Because I had a discussion on Twitter as well when Epo released his stars. Some of them said, Domestique, you're drunk, go home. And I just said, I'm going to save this till Sunday. And here we are. Sprinters, no chance. Pogacar third. So we predicted it quite well.
Yeah, I think people just underestimated how hard this course was with all the constant accelerations. Like the sprinters were never in the race. Like Philipsen, just from the moment the only time I saw him in the race was when he got dropped.
Kooij survived the longest, I think, of that pure sprinters. Bennett was even dropped before the Glasgow circuit, if I recall correctly. He was dropped very early. So yeah, we were right in that. 100% correct, listeners. Last time I'm going to say it. I have a couple of things more to add, or predictions. Hannes mentioned Pogacar, and Dieter managed Pogacar as winner. I let my heart speak and chose Van Der Poel. He won, but it's because, I love the guy that I chose him, and I was lucky he won. More interesting is the dark horses picks. Hannes chose Laporte. Sadly, he suffered a mechanical. Tried to come back, was solo at one point, but it was unmanageable to bridge back to the front group. So we didn't really see him at the front of the race. And we don't know what he would have done if he didn't have a mechanical. Dieter picked Hirschi, and I have to be honest, I expected a lot more from him. He disappointed me a little bit. His teammate, Mauro Schmidt, did the opposite, and he surprised me with a very strong performance. And I chose Polis. He showed himself. He was strong, but he didn't reach the top 10 as well. So our dark horses didn't really deliver.
No, it was a very, very hard course for dark horses. I do want to mention that Schmidt, I don't think he surprised me with his strong race. It just goes to show a little bit of a sidetrack, but that Quickstep is a little bit of a made a questionable move letting him go. But
it's all in on Remco Evenepoel in the Quickstep squad, and they are letting go some big talents, and I hope they don't. Yeah.
But if Remco only does like one stage, like one Grand Tour, and then 3 1-week races and then 3 classics. You know, you need to have a team next to that to do the other races, but they made their choice. Shame on them.
2 last questions to end off, and I just need one name on both questions. Your surprise of the day.
It has to be Dinham, right? I think that's the only right answer. If you can land 7th place from the break, how can you not be surprised of the day?
And to end it off, your disappointment of the day.
Oh. I think that's a very difficult one. Might be Laporte.
So there were a lot of disappointments.
No, it was more like it's a very honest race. You know, everyone ended up where they belonged. With perhaps the exception of a Hirschi, which I did expect more of, and he ended up not finishing. But you know, if you're in a race situation where you have no more shot and you're considered as one of the outside favorites, you just get off the bike. But it's gonna pain me to say maybe Remco.
I can understand that. That's it. It's up to you.
All right. I was totally not ready, but
don't cry. I know it's hard that Remco is out of the rainbow jersey, but
he's going to be in the Belgian jersey now, and it's going to be beautiful.
And we have a beautiful wearer of the rainbow jersey. So
that too. And Remco's going to win the Vuelta in the Belgian jersey, so that's nice too. For those people who don't know, the Vuelta is coming up, so let's.
I love your belief, but he's one of the main favorites. But that's something for in a couple of weeks. Let's end this episode off. Up to you.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap for today's Domestique Cycling Podcast. A big thank you to our audience for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, consider supporting us on Ko-Fi, link in the description. And if you're on YouTube, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.
I've got the spots, the sickness. There's the twins in my brain.